She believed she would wed a disabled billionaire. But on wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The gray clouds hung low over the quiet city of Seattle, painting everything in shades of silver and blue. Rain tapped steadily on the windowpane of a small apartment where Elena Brooks, a 26-year-old nurse, stood holding an envelope she could not afford to open. It was another overdue bill from the hospital that treated her younger brother, Luke. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the kitchen table beside a chipped mug of instant coffee. The smell of rain drifted in through the half-open window, cool and sharp, and for a moment she closed her eyes, wishing life would pause long enough for her to breathe. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Miss Brooks?" a deep voice asked. "This is Adrian Cross. I would like to meet you regarding a personal matter. Can you come to Cross Manor this evening at 7 o'clock? She frowned. "I am sorry, but I think you have the wrong number." I never dial the wrong number," the man replied calmly. "You helped care for my friend at St. Mary's Hospital last year. I remember your compassion. I need someone like you." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Cross Manor was a name whispered in the city, home to one of the youngest billionaires in the country, a man said to have lost the use of his legs after a tragic car accident. Still, something in his tone steady, commanding, but not cruel made her agree. "All right, I will come." Hours later, the rain had turned to mist as Elena climbed the marble steps of the mansion. The air smelled faintly of cedar and money. Inside, the world was quiet, too quiet. A grand piano sat beneath a chandelier, untouched, while the crackle of a fireplace filled the silence. Then she saw him, Adrian Cross, sitting in a wheelchair near the window, dressed in a dark suit, his eyes unreadable. He looked nothing like the stories had described. "Miss Brooks," he said softly, "please sit." She obeyed, her heart pounding. "I will be direct," Adrian continued. "I need a wife." Elena blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "Excuse me? This is not a proposal of love," he said. "It is a contract. A marriage in name only. I require a spouse to fulfill a clause in my father's will. In return, you will receive full payment of your brother's medical debt and a new start." The room spun. She wanted to laugh, to run, to cry. "You do not even know me." Adrian's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "I know enough. You are honest. You are kind. You need help. And I," his gaze dropped to his motionless legs, "need someone the world will believe still cares for me." Elena stared at him, stunned. "So, you want me to marry you? Out of pity?" "No," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Out of choice." The firelight flickered across his face, revealing the loneliness beneath his calm. Something about that stillness broke through her fear. Maybe it was the way his hands tightened on the armrest, or the shadow of pain that crossed his eyes when he said the word choice. When she left the manor that night, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened like liquid glass beneath the streetlights. She looked down at her reflection in a puddle, saw her pale face, her tired eyes, and whispered to herself, "What have you gotten into, Elena?" Behind her, in the high window of Cross Manor, Adrian watched the faint figure walking away into the mist. His hand rested loosely on the wheel of his chair. When the door closed, he reached down slowly, deliberately, and placed both feet flat on the ground. For a brief second, he stood upright. Then he sank back into the chair, expression unreadable. The game had already begun. The morning after her strange meeting at Cross Manor, Elena barely slept. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, the gray light of dawn spilling through the thin curtains. The sound of traffic from the street below mixed with the soft hum of her neighbor's radio. The words Adrian Cross had said echoed in her mind like a haunting refrain. "I need a wife." Her brother Luke stirred in the next room, coughing softly. He was 20 years old, far too young to be chained to a dialysis machine 3 times a week. Elena had been the one to keep him alive since their parents passed away. Now the hospital bills were stacked higher than the coffee cups in her sink. When she checked her phone, a new message appeared from the hospital administration. Payment due in 48 hours to continue treatment. Her stomach tightened. She whispered to herself, 2 days. I do not even have enough for one. Vuh. At that moment, her best friend, Maria, knocked on the door carrying a bag of groceries. You look like you have not slept, she said gently. Elena forced a small smile. I met someone last night. Someone who made a crazy offer. Maria raised an eyebrow. Crazy good or crazy dangerous? Both, Elena said, handing her the folded business card that bore the embossed letters Adrian Cross. Maria's eyes widened. The Adrian Cross? The billionaire who had that car crash? Yes, Elena whispered. He asked me to marry him. Not out of love. As part of a contract. Maria laughed nervously, then saw the seriousness in Elena's face. You are not actually considering it, are you? I do not know, Elena said, her voice breaking. Luke's next treatment will be cancelled if I cannot pay. What choice do I have? Maria's voice softened. Be careful. People like him. They live in a different world. Elena nodded, tears filling her eyes. I know, but maybe, just maybe, I can borrow his world long enough to save mine. That afternoon, she took the long bus ride back to Cross Manor. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds. The mansion loomed ahead like something out of a forgotten dream, vast and silent. She hesitated at the gates until a voice came through the intercom. Miss Brooks, Mr. Cross is expecting you. The iron gates swung open without another word. Inside, Adrian sat in the same wheelchair near the grand window, sunlight glinting off the silver frame of his chair. He looked up from a stack of papers as she entered. You came back, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. I have questions. Ask them. What happens after 6 months? She asked. The contract will end, Adrian said. You will receive full payment for your brother's medical care and a new apartment registered in your name. You will be free to leave. Oh, and what do you get? Elena asked. He studied her face for a long moment before answering. A partner who helps me fulfill the inheritance clause in my father's will. If I am not married by the end of this fiscal year, the board will divide the company and everything my family built will disappear. Elena frowned. You could have chosen anyone. Why me? Adrian's expression did not change. Because you do not want anything from me. That is rare in my world. The air between them thickened. For the first time, Elena noticed the small tremor in his hands, the effort it took for him to keep his composure. Beneath the calm exterior, there was pain, real pain, and something else she could not name. Finally, she said, if I agree, I want it in writing. Every promise. Of course, Adrian said. My lawyer will prepare the documents. He paused, then added softly, You should know, Miss Brooks, that life in this house will not be easy. The press will tear you apart. My board will despise you. My family will call you a fraud. But if you can endure 6 months, your brother will live. That is what I can offer. Her throat tightened. The rain began again, tapping gently against the glass. She thought of Luke's pale face, his thin wrists wrapped in hospital tape, the way he smiled every time she brought him apple slices from the cafeteria. She thought of the way his eyes dimmed each time the doctor mentioned the word payment. When she looked up, her decision was already made. All right, she said quietly. I will do it. Adrian's gaze softened for the first time. Good. We will begin the arrangements immediately. He extended his hand. She hesitated before shaking it. His palm was warm, steady, and far more human than she expected. As she left the mansion that evening, the sun was setting behind the hills, casting long golden streaks across the wet pavement. For the first time in months, Elena felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, Maybe this is the beginning of something that will break me, or save me. Behind the high windows of Cross Manor, Adrian watched her car disappear down the winding road. His reflection flickered against the glass. He reached for the file labeled marriage contract on the table, then looked down at his legs still and unmoving and whispered to himself, Let us see if you can heal more than what the world can see. The following week arrived faster than Elena expected. The official papers were delivered to her apartment in a heavy leather folder sealed with a gold crest. Each page spelled out the terms of the marriage, duration, public appearances, confidentiality, and payment schedule. The language was cold and precise, the kind lawyers use to measure human lives in dollars and signatures. She read every line carefully. Her stomach twisted as she reached the clause that forbade emotional involvement. No personal attachments are to be formed, it said. This agreement is to remain strictly professional. For some reason, those words stung more than anything else. When she arrived at Cross Manor that evening, the long driveway was lined with white roses and black sedans. Adrian waited for her in the grand foyer, wearing a dark suit and sitting in his wheelchair as always. The air smelled faintly of rain and cedar polish. "Are you ready to sign?" he asked, voice steady but distant. Elena nodded. "I have read everything." He gestured to the table where 2 copies of the contract lay waiting. "Then all that is left is your signature." Her hand trembled slightly as she took the pen. She glanced at Adrian, hoping to see even a flicker of doubt in his face. But his expression remained unreadable. She signed her name Elena Brooks and set the pen down. Adrian's lawyer, a tall man with silver hair, signed as witness and left without a word. Adrian rolled his wheelchair forward, offering his hand. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Cross." The wedding ceremony was held quietly at the county courthouse 2 days later. No reporters, no guests, no family, just 2 signatures, a single flash from the clerk's camera, and the sound of rain outside. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Elena forced a polite smile. She wore a simple ivory dress borrowed from a thrift store, while Adrian's dark suit fit him with perfect precision. After the ceremony, a driver escorted them back to the mansion. As the car passed through the wrought iron gates, Elena gazed at the sprawling estate that would now be her home. It felt less like a dream and more like a cage made of glass and stone. Inside, Adrian showed her to her room. "This will be your private space," he said. The room was large and spotless, filled with antique furniture, a chandelier that sparkled like frost, and windows overlooking the garden. Yet despite its beauty, it felt cold, too perfect to be lived in. "You will find everything you need here," he added. "Dinner is at 7 o'clock sharp." She nodded silently as he wheeled away down the corridor, his movements precise, almost rehearsed. When the door closed, Elena sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the framed landscape above the fireplace. It was a painting of a storm clearing over a mountain valley, sunlight breaking through dark clouds. She whispered, "Maybe that is a sign." "Okay." That evening, the long dining table was set for 2, but the distance between them felt like a mile. The meal was elegant, each dish arranged like artwork. Adrian cut his steak with practiced care, his every motion deliberate. Elena barely touched her food. He broke the silence first. "Are you settling in well?" "It is beautiful here," she said quietly, "but it does not feel real." He looked up at her. "Reality is often less comfortable than illusion." "Out." She frowned slightly, unsure how to respond. He continued eating, unbothered by her silence. After dinner, Adrian called for his assistant to bring the household staff into the foyer. One by one, they lined up cooks, maids, a gardener, and a chauffeur. Adrian introduced Elena to each of them with formality. "This is Mrs. Cross," he said, his tone calm but firm. "You will treat her with the same respect you show me." The staff nodded politely, though some exchanged quick glances of curiosity and judgment. Elena smiled awkwardly, wishing the marble floor would swallow her whole. Later that night, unable to sleep, she wandered into the hallway. The mansion was silent, except for the faint ticking of a clock somewhere far away. She passed a room with its door slightly open. Inside was a private study, mahogany shelves, books in neat rows, and a grand piano standing alone beneath the window. Her curiosity drew her closer. She brushed her fingers lightly across the piano keys, and the soft note echoed through the empty hall. Suddenly, Adrian's voice came from behind her. "Do you play?" Elena turned quickly. He was there in his wheelchair, half in shadow. "A little," she said. "My mother taught me before she passed away." He nodded slowly. "Music can make silence less cruel." She smiled faintly. "Is that why you keep the piano closed?" He looked at the instrument for a long moment. "Because some silences should not be broken." There was something in his tone, loneliness, maybe guilt, that made her heart ache. But before she could speak again, he wheeled away, leaving her standing in the dim light. As she returned to her room, the words of the contract echoed in her mind. No personal attachments are to be formed. Yet already, she could feel the edges of her resolve beginning to blur. Somewhere deep inside, Elena sensed that the man behind the calm mask of Adrian Cross was hiding a truth far more fragile than anyone could see. Outside, thunder rolled over the distant hills, and the rain began again. In the flickering light of the storm, the mansion seemed alive, holding its secrets close. Days turned into a quiet routine at Cross Manor. Every morning, Elena woke to the sound of rain brushing against the windows and the scent of coffee drifting up from the kitchen. She learned the rhythm of the house: quickly breakfast at 8 o'clock, meetings for Adrian in his study, and dinners that felt more like formal interviews than meals between a husband and wife. Despite the contract's cold boundaries, Elena did her best to fulfill her role. She attended etiquette lessons arranged by Adrian's assistant, wore elegant clothes tailored to fit her new life, and practiced polite smiles for the photographers who lingered at the gates. At first, her steps were awkward, her posture stiff. But each day she became more confident, more poised, even as she felt less like herself. One afternoon, Adrian found her in the greenhouse, standing among the orchids. "You seem more at ease here than anywhere else," he said, wheeling closer. Elena brushed her fingers across a leaf still wet from the misting system. "Plants do not judge," she said. "They only grow when you treat them gently." May. He studied her for a moment, then said quietly, "People are not so different." Their lessons together continued. He taught her how to hold a glass at galas, how to read a contract before signing, and how to recognize a dishonest smile. In turn, she reminded him what it looked like to laugh without caution. Sometimes, when he thought she was not looking, he smiled, small, genuine, fleeting. One evening, they sat by the fire reviewing the guest list for an upcoming charity gala. "You will attend with me," Adrian said, his voice calm but final. "It will be your first appearance as Mrs. Cross." Elena hesitated. "Do you really think I belong there?" "You belong wherever you choose to stand," he replied. "Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." The night of the gala arrived with a drizzle that made the city lights shimmer. Elena wore a silver gown that caught the glow of every flashbulb as they entered the ballroom. Adrian guided his wheelchair beside her, his posture steady, his face unreadable beneath the camera's gaze. Inside, music swelled, and conversation buzzed around them. Elena smiled and greeted strangers, just as he had taught her. But when a reporter asked how it felt to marry one of the richest men in America, she answered softly, "We are all searching for something that makes us whole." For a moment, the crowd fell silent. Then flashes erupted again, brighter, sharper. Across the room, Adrian's eyes met hers. There was something unspoken between them: respect, admiration. Maybe something deeper, neither dared to name. As they left the gala later that night, Elena looked out the car window at the rain-soaked streets and whispered, "Maybe this was not a mistake after all." Adrian said nothing, but his reflection in the glass showed a faint smile he could not quite hide. The days following the gala felt strangely lighter. The newspapers called her the Quiet Bride. And for once, the headlines were not cruel. Adrian read them over breakfast with the same calm detachment he brought to everything, but Elena caught the faint amusement in his eyes. For the first time, she saw the man behind the legend, less a billionaire made of steel, and more a human being quietly relearning how to feel. Their evenings became less formal. Sometimes they shared dinner without the staff. Sometimes they walked, or rather, she walked while he guided his wheelchair through the garden at dusk. The rain had given way to a shy spring, and the roses were beginning to bloom again. One evening, Elena found Adrian alone in the library, staring at an old photograph framed on the desk. It was of him and a man who resembled him closely, his late father. She stood quietly at the door until he spoke. "He built everything you see here," Adrian said softly, "and in his will, he left me one final condition: be married by the end of the fiscal year, or the company would fall into the hands of the board." Elena nodded. "That is why you needed me." "Yes," he said, meeting her gaze. At first, that was all it was. His voice dropped. "But it is not that simple anymore." Silence filled the room, heavy but not cold. The fire crackled softly. Elena moved closer, resting her hand on the edge of the desk. "You do not have to be alone in this house," she said. He looked at her hand, then up at her. For a heartbeat, the mask he wore every day slipped. I am afraid that if I forget the rules, I will forget why they existed. She smiled faintly. Maybe some rules deserve to be broken. The next morning, the entire household seemed different. The staff greeted her with warmth. The chef even asked what dessert she preferred for dinner. When Adrian joined her in the dining room, he looked less guarded. We have a board meeting today, he told her. You do not have to attend. I want to, she said. If I am your wife in name, I should also stand beside you in the storm. That afternoon, in the grand conference room at Cross Industries, the executives eyed her with open skepticism. When Adrian introduced her as Mrs. Cross, one of the older board members smirked. We expected someone more experienced, he said. Elena met his gaze calmly. Experience is not always a measure of worth, she replied. The room fell silent, and even Adrian's usually unreadable expression softened with pride. That evening, as they drove home under the fading light, he said quietly, You handled them better than I ever could. Elena smiled. Maybe it is easier to face the world when someone believes you can. Adrian glanced out the window at the horizon, glowing orange and gold. Then let us both keep believing. Oh, and for the first time since their contract began, the word we sounded real. The evening after the board meeting, the mansion felt different. The air no longer carried that silent tension that once filled every corridor. Elena lingered by the grand piano, her fingers tracing the polished keys as the last light of sunset filtered through the tall windows. Adrian entered quietly behind her, rolling his wheelchair closer until the soft hum of its wheels broke the stillness. You play beautifully, he said. She smiled without looking up. I barely touched the keys. Sometimes silence plays louder than sound, he replied. Elena turned toward him, catching the reflection of the fading sunlight in his eyes. You always speak like every word hides something, she said softly. He paused. Maybe it does. The space between them felt charged but gentle. For the first time, Adrian did not look like a man trapped by his own body or his father's legacy. He looked alive, vulnerable even. That night, a storm rolled in from the coast. Rain hammered against the windows, thunder echoing over the hills. Elena could not sleep. She left her room and found Adrian in his study, still awake, the glow from the fireplace outlining his face in amber light. You should rest, she said. So should you, he replied, his tone softer than she had ever heard. She crossed the room and sat across from him. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only the faint hiss of rain and the steady rhythm of their breathing. I never thanked you, Adrian said suddenly, for standing beside me today. You could have walked away 100 times, but you did not. Elena met his gaze. Maybe I stopped seeing this as a contract. His eyes softened. Then what do you see it as? She hesitated, then answered truthfully. A chance to believe in someone again. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he reached forward, his hand covering hers. His palm was warm, steady, and real. Elena, he said quietly, there are things about me you still do not know. I know enough, she whispered. The fire flickered, throwing small sparks across the room. The storm began to fade, leaving only the soft patter of rain on the glass. Neither of them moved. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full, alive with unspoken things neither dared to name. When Elena finally returned to her room, her heart felt both lighter and heavier. She stood by the window, watching the last drops of rain slide down the glass, and realized that somewhere between duty and deceit, something real had begun to grow. Down the hall, Adrian remained in his study, his hand still resting on the armrest of the wheelchair. He stared at the fire until it burned low, then slowly stood on his own, his shadow long and steady against the wall. He whispered into the quiet, I cannot hide forever. The next morning began with sunlight instead of rain. For once, the mansion looked warm, almost alive. Elena was in the garden trimming the roses when she noticed the sound of raised voices coming from the study. The tone was sharp, unfamiliar, and filled with tension. She followed the sound to find the door slightly open. Inside, Adrian sat behind his desk, his lawyer standing opposite him. Papers were scattered across the polished wood. You cannot keep this secret forever, the lawyer said, his voice low but urgent. If the board learns that your injury was exaggerated, they will accuse you of fraud. The marriage will be questioned, and everything your father built could collapse. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. Adrian's voice remained calm. That is my risk to take. Yours, perhaps, the lawyer replied. But what about hers? The woman you married under false pretenses, what happens when she finds out? Adrian's silence said more than any answer could. The lawyer gathered his papers and left, nearly brushing past Elena in the hallway. She stepped back, heart pounding. For a long moment, she stood there, the words echoing in her mind. The injury was exaggerated. False pretenses. The truth she had been too afraid to name now stood before her, cold and unshakable. That evening, she waited until the staff had retired before going to Adrian's study. The rain had returned, light and steady, as though the sky itself knew what was about to happen. He was sitting by the fire again, staring into the flames. "How long?" she asked quietly. "Have you been able to walk?" His shoulders tensed. He did not look at her. "Elena, listen. Answer me," she said, her voice trembling. "How long?" He closed his eyes for a moment before speaking. "Since before we met." Her breath left her in a single shudder. So it was all a lie. The wheelchair, the pity, the marriage, everything. "It began as a lie," he admitted, his tone low, heavy with shame. "But it is not one anymore." She laughed, but there was no joy in it. "You trapped me, Adrian. You made me believe you needed help when you only needed a pawn." "Oh, that is not true," he said quickly, standing now, his legs steady beneath him. "I needed to know who would stay when there was nothing left to gain. I needed someone who would not love the power, only the person." She stared at him in disbelief. "And you thought deceiving me was the way to prove that?" His voice broke. "I was afraid, Elena. Everyone who ever claimed to care for me did it for the name, for the money, for the company. I did not know how else to find something real." "Ma." Tears filled her eyes, not from pity but from anger. "You wanted something real? Then you should have been real yourself." She turned to leave, but he caught her hand. "Please. I never meant to hurt you." She pulled away, shaking her head. "You already did." As she walked out into the rain, the storm grew stronger. Lightning flashed above the iron gates, and thunder rolled through the hills. In that moment, she realized how fragile their world had been built on deception, held together by hope. Inside, Adrian stood motionless, staring at the door she had just closed. The fire crackled behind him, casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in years, the mansion felt empty again. He whispered to the silence, "I never wanted to lose her, not like this." But outside, beneath the storm, Elena was already gone. 3 days passed. The rain did not stop, and neither did the ache that followed Elena everywhere she went. She stayed at a small motel on the edge of the city, the kind with flickering lights and thin walls where nobody asked questions. Her suitcase sat by the bed, unopened. Each night she replayed his words, trying to make sense of them. "I needed to know who would stay when there was nothing left to gain." It was meant to sound noble, but all she could hear was betrayal. Meanwhile, the media had already caught the scent of scandal. Headlines appeared across every screen. "Billionaire marriage, exposed as hoax." "Adrian Cross, walks again." But what else is he hiding? Cameras surrounded the gates of Cross Manor, reporters shouting questions that went unanswered. Inside the mansion, Adrian faced the chaos he had created. The board called an emergency meeting, demanding explanations and threatening legal action. He sat at the head of the long table, no longer in a wheelchair, his voice calm but resolute. "You may strip me of my title if you wish," he said, "but you will not destroy what my father built." One of the older executives slammed a folder shut. "Your lies have already destroyed it. The company's reputation is ruined. Investors are pulling out, and your so-called wife has vanished." Adrian stood, unflinching. "Then let me take the blame alone. Every falsehood began with me. Leave her out of this." That night, after the meeting, he released a public statement. Standing before a wall of cameras, he confessed everything: the deception, the contract, the truth about his recovery. "I was a coward," he said simply. "I hid behind a lie because I was afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. I will spend the rest of my life making amends." The video spread across the internet within hours. Viewers were divided, some furious, some unexpectedly moved. But one person watched in silence from that small motel room, tears welling in her eyes. Elena switched off the television and sat for a long time in the dim light. She could still see the exhaustion in his face, the sincerity that had replaced the arrogance. He had looked straight into the camera and said, "If she ever hears this, I want her to know that I did not fall in love because of her kindness. I fell in love because she saw me when I no longer saw myself." Her chest tightened. The words were too real to ignore, too raw to be another manipulation. The next morning, Elena returned to St. Mary's Hospital to check on her brother. The nurse at the desk smiled. "Your brother's bills have been paid in full, Miss Brooks. An anonymous donor covered everything." Elena's breath caught. She did not need to ask who it was. Later that evening, she found herself standing outside the gates of Cross Manor again. Reporters were gone, the mansion quiet beneath the fading sunset. She hesitated, unsure whether to ring the bell. Before she could decide, the door opened. Adrian stood there, no wheelchair, no pretense, only a man stripped of everything but truth. "Elena," he said softly, "I did not think you would come." "I did not think I would either," she admitted. He stepped closer, the distance between them charged but fragile. "Everything I own is gone, but if I can still give something honest, it is this my apology." "Oh," she looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of deceit, and found none. "Apologies are words, Adrian. What matters is what you do next." He nodded. "Then let me show you." He turned, gesturing toward the vast estate behind him. "I am turning the company's assets into a foundation, a charity for medical aid, for families like yours. It will be called the Brooks Hope Fund. It is not enough, but it is a start." Elena's throat tightened. "You did not have to do that." "Oh, yes, I did," he said, "because love is not a contract, it is a choice." For the first time since she had walked away, she believed him. The storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain, fresh, clean, full of possibility. Spring melted into summer, and for the first time in months, Cross Manor no longer felt like a monument to guilt. Workers filled the garden, restoring what the storms had ruined. The iron gates that once guarded secrets now opened freely to families who came seeking help through the Brooks Hope Fund. What began as Adrian's apology had become something larger, a place where second chances grew like wildflowers after the rain. Elena returned often, though never with the same uncertainty that once shadowed her steps. She volunteered with the foundation, meeting mothers, veterans, and children whose lives were being changed by the program. Each story reminded her of why she had once taken a stranger's impossible offer to save her brother, and somehow, to save herself. One warm afternoon, she found Adrian in the greenhouse, tending to the orchids she had loved since her first days there. He looked up as she entered, a soft smile forming. "They survived the storm," he said. "All they needed was patience." "Maybe that is true for people too," she replied. He wiped his hands on a towel, studying her face. "I never asked if you would forgive me." Elena tilted her head, her voice gentle but steady. "Forgiveness is not something you ask for. It is something you earn." "And have I earned it?" She took a breath, then nodded. "You have started to." They walked together through the garden. Sunlight spilled over the path, touching the roses, the lilies, and the small plaque by the fountain that read, "For hope that heals all wounds." Children laughed in the distance, their voices rising above the hum of life, returning. Adrian stopped near the fountain and turned to her. "I once built this world to prove I was untouchable," he said. "Now I only want to prove that love can outlast every mistake." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was not the diamond ring from their first wedding, but a simple silver band engraved with the words, "For truth, not appearances." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. "I know," he said. "That is why it matters." He sank to one knee, not out of show, but out of sincerity. "Elena Brooks, will you marry me? Not as part of a contract, but as part of a life?" The world seemed to pause. Wind rustled through the leaves, carrying the faint scent of rain and roses. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Yes," she said. "This time, I will marry you for real." "Oh, Faye." Later that evening, as the sun set over the hills, the small garden ceremony took place. There were no photographers, no board members, no contracts, only friends, staff, and the quiet sound of music floating through the open air. Luke stood beside his sister, healthy and smiling, holding the bouquet she had once thought she would never use again. When Adrian and Elena exchanged vows, the light caught the silver ring, and for a brief moment, it shimmered like a promise reborn. As the guests cheered softly, Adrian turned to her and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me that love is not about perfection, it is about persistence." Elena smiled, "And thank you for proving that truth can be beautiful, even when it hurts." They walked together beneath the string lights, hand in hand, the night calm and golden around them. The final voiceover faded in. Once, she believed she would marry a man who could never walk again. But the truth was far greater than any lie. He stood, he fell, and he learned how to walk toward love, one honest step at a time.